All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode. And if you have a question that you would like answered on a future episode, since this is a question and answer based podcast, go over to fearcastpodcast.com and you can send me an audio question there. You can send me a text question there by clicking on the submit a question link. But you know what? As it turns out, you can also send me an audio question there. So you can click on the little button at the top right of the page. It's going to say record your question. You press the button. You enable your browser to use your microphone. It should be easy to do. But you record your audio there, it gets sent directly to me. Now, if that's a really good option, if you don't want to use Instagram, if you're one of those folks who just doesn't want to use Instagram, and I get it, I don't want to use it either. But if you have the Instagrams and you would like to go send me an audio question over there, I'm Fearcast Podcast. Go over to my page, send me a DM, record your voice in the little microphone section down there, and you can send me an audio question. As a reminder, audio questions get sent to the tippity top of the list and will be recorded at the next episode where I'm not interviewing some other professional. And guess what? Today is one of those types of episodes. So today, I got a question from Annie. She sent me a question recently. So she sent a question in to me a while ago, a couple of years ago, and she wanted to send a follow-up to that. So I'll play her audio here in a moment, and I just want to follow up with it, give it kind of a little bit of an idea about what to do with it, and it gives you kind of something to think about. I mean, ultimately, I think what it comes down to, well, not what it comes down to, as a spoiler, it's in response to one of my most recent episodes where someone was asking about what do you do when you really believe your fears? And she asked this follow-up of not only what if she really believes her fears, but hey, what happens if your fears actually happen? And I think that's a really important question for all of us in OCD and anxiety land to consider because, we'll jump into that in just a little bit. But before I jump into that, I kind of wanted to talk about this. I was talking about this with one of my clients earlier today, where, we talk about with the OCD cycle that, if you've heard me talk about it before, it's kind of this idea of like, all right, you've got these, triggers, internal, external triggers that go on. Those are out of our control and those are inherently neutral, right? Neither good nor bad, right nor wrong. The basic example is like, a knife. Is it good or bad? It's both, right? It can be used to open a letter, it can be used to open a person. Either way, it's neutral. So when we see that or when we have thoughts about stuff like that, it's going to bring on this obsessive thought. That's usually this if-then or what-if question. Sometimes it's this accusation question. Sometimes it's a statement that it's like a statement that goes against who you are or makes you doubt what you believe to be true about yourself, kind of this insinuation, right? So from that, it's gonna usually trigger this anxiety. Now we talk about it as this anxiety, and then the compulsion to try to eliminate that anxiety or make sure the story doesn't happen. And through that process, we get a little bit of relief, but it reinforces the thought, etc. So when we talk about the anxiety bit, sometimes it's not anxiety. What if it's not anxiety? What if it's numbness? What if it's emptiness? What if it's sadness? What if it's loss? What if it's vulnerability, right? What if it's like a general sense of being watched, like a sense of paranoia, right? Now, all of these are possible when it comes to that response, right? Because the obsessive story, is going to tell us this, again, it's a story. It doesn't mean that it's right, but it's a story, and some stories kind of suck, right? Or some stories are sad or scary. So it's going to trigger this feeling. And what I want people to start to think about is that feeling doesn't always have to be just simply anxiety, or even, an extension of that like fear or dread, right? It can be that sense of, that sense of vulnerability, or, some type of vague danger, or like, to that point about like feeling watched. Yes, I know it's a kind of an interpretation of what that feeling means, but it's not always a direct line where you'd go, well, I don't feel afraid. I feel, numb or empty or disconnected, and I don't want to feel that. So I'm going to do my compulsion. And that compulsion can, be anything, right? It can be avoidance. It can be lining up stuff on your desk. It can be picking your nose in just the right way. It can be, touching the doorknob and then touching the big toe on your left foot. Just who knows what it is, right? Compulsions are these, to a certain degree, magical things that we do to try to make that feeling pass or go away, or feel a sense of rightness or goodness or safety, or to make sure that that story doesn't happen in the way that you fear it might, right? So what I want to encourage folks to think about is that anxiety piece can sometimes just be, and we should think about it as just an unwanted feeling state. That's really all it is, right? It's not bad. It's just unwanted at that time, right? Anxiety isn't bad. Fear isn't bad, because it's just, when it comes to the stuff that we're talking about, it's just happening at a time that you don't want it to happen. So, another classic example is, fear and anxiety. If it's not bad. If you go to a scary movie and you watch that movie and you don't feel anything, we call it a bad movie. But if you go into that movie and you feel fear, you feel like your body's in danger when you know you're not, you go, that was a good movie, and you paid $20 or whatever the heck it is, or at your theater, to go see it and to go feel it. So you paid $20 to feel something that at another time you said, I don't want it, that feeling's bad. It's not bad, it's unwanted at that time, right? So again, I want to shift this over to an unwanted feeling state, and it can broaden your view of what that feeling is. But ultimately, we're broadening where we need to be stepping into, broadening what we're willing to feel, right? ACT has an approach. So acceptance and commitment theory has an approach to that. And it's called expansion. And it's an exercise where we are expanding what we are willing to feel and what we're willing to experience, right? In the OCD cycle, by definition, you're saying, I don't want to feel this and I'm not willing to feel it, right? ACT further calls that experiential avoidance, because you are feeling that and you're just going, no, I'm out, I'm done, I don't want to feel that. Our job is to acknowledge that we feel that way. It doesn't mean that we have to do what it says, but we just go, yeah, my body's feeling this way because I've got an anxiety disorder. I have a disordered but there's a disordered way in which my body is experiencing and producing and manifesting, whatever, the feeling of a natural, normal human emotion. It's just showing up way often and in a weird time and in a weird way than I want it to. So it's an anxiety disorder. It is out of order in the way that it is presenting, right? But it's unwanted and it's broad. So we're going to get used to whatever that broad feeling is. So just something to think about as you are kind of thinking about moving forward in your exposures and what it means to do ERP and what it means to face your fears. It's face your whatever it is that you're trying to avoid or not feel. That's what we're trying to embrace. All right. So why don't I play Annie's question and then we'll get into answering it.
Hi. I was just listening to your podcast, I think it was 242, but I could be wrong, about when you believe your obsessions and are rigid about them. I know I contacted you before, like a few years ago, but since then I've had toenail fungus twice, and it's been on my hands multiple times, and now I'm afraid to go around anyone who has toenail fungus or fingernail fungus. And it just so happens that I guess you attract what you're afraid of. I don't know. But my best friend has it. My other friend has it. My sister-in-law has it. And I quit work where a gentleman had it really bad on his hands. One hand. Anyway, how can I make this to where it's not that important to me? Because the risks are real. It is contagious. I have seen doctors. It is a very hard fungus to get rid of, and those are the medical facts about it. However, I'm living a shrunk life that has no or very little enjoyment, and the thought of having it on my feet again and taking that medicine that no one wants to give you because it's hard on your liver or something, I don't know. The thought of that, I just am so repulsed of it. Please, can you help me? If you can give me any tips, I totally know how to do ERP. I've totally been in IOP for 8 weeks. I've been in residential for 8.5. And when I got out of residential is when I got it again. So I'm just beside myself, really. And I could use some sort of direction, if you will, on what to do. Being it is real, and being I have experienced it more than once. I just am trying so hard. My brain is trying so hard to protect me from it again. Even though I can't have certainty on that, I seem to be trying my hardest. And anyway, thank you. I hope that you could help me. Your podcast I was just listening to seemed to really resonate with me, and I thought, why not reach out? Thank you.
All right, Annie, thank you so much for that question. So again, I think this is a really good question. And here is the primary reason why I love this question. There's nothing that we promise in OCD land to say that by doing exposures, by working on these things, it will decrease the chances of something happening, or it will protect you from an unwanted event. What ultimately we want to learn is that the feeling, or the outcome, there's kind of a lot of things. The outcome of what we're afraid of is less likely than our brain suggests it's going to happen, right? Because that alarm system is going off, even Annie, in your mind, it's going off all the time, right? So it's going off all the time, and by that idea, that means that if you were to not do any of your compulsions, you'd be getting it all the time, right? If the danger signal were right all the time, that means you would constantly be getting it if that was true. Now, you might be constantly at risk of it, but isn't that everybody else? And we'll talk about that in a minute. But we're not decreasing the chances of it. We're learning that it's unlikely, less likely than we think, and that we can handle that sense of uncertainty, that sense of doubt about whether or not it's going to happen, if it's going to happen right now, whether or not the action that I'm doing is actually preventing that thing or keeping me safe, right? Or learning ultimately that behavior that you're doing is maybe unhelpful or unnecessary or excessive. And by cutting that out, we're not lowering the risk. We're instead experiencing the level of risk of everybody else, right? Okay, so with that said, I want to then kind of jump into this a little bit more. What we're trying to do is to live our fullest life as best we possibly can. And that means, and I love this phrase, is living at the risk of something happening. We're not trying to live in a risky way. And OCD therapists and anxiety therapists aren't saying, hey, go out there and go live dangerously, right? Go drive your car with your feet or something like that. It's the idea that we're going out and living our life as the average person would. And, average is, it's a spectrum, right? The average, in the bell curve, it's kind of right here in the middle. It's not doing things way too much, but it's also not doing way too little of things, right? We're not trying to put ourselves in dangerous situations or doing things that are dangerous and or risky, but we're going to be doing things as the average person would, but that will feel risky and dangerous to you as your anxiety, your disordered anxiety is kicking off, is alarming, is sounding way too much, way too often, way too loud. You get the idea, right? So it's going to feel risky and dangerous, but it doesn't mean that it actually is. Now, by doing it though, we're living in risk like everybody else, right? And that's an important phrase. The like everybody else is important because we're not trying to say we're always going to be safe or that something bad is never going to happen, right? So there's this weird thing that sometimes happens when we do exposures with folks, right? And trying to get used to and trying to face our fears is that sometimes bad stuff happens. And that's going to trigger a bunch of people in their fear, right? Okay. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say we're doing contamination exposures and the person is afraid that maybe they're going to get sick if they touch something and not wash or whatever it might be. This is a very basic example. Sometimes we do, in fact, get sick. Sometimes we will, get an infection. Sometimes we will catch a cold or something to that effect, right? And sometimes then people go in and blame their compulsions, or they blame, the therapist. So like, see, I should have done this thing. Had I not done this thing, I wouldn't have gotten sick. But how would you know, right? And let's put it another way, right? If we're driving more, if we're doing more exposures with driving, there is a chance for everybody to get into a car accident, right? That's a possibility. But what we're learning again is the level of fear that anxiety is putting out there is a lot higher than what's actually producing what we actually will experience in everyday life, right? But that is not a 0% chance. It's a non-zero chance of getting into a car accident, just as it's a non-zero chance of catching some sort of illness, right? Now, we can extrapolate this to pretty much everything, but again, it doesn't mean that just because there is a non-zero chance, it doesn't mean that it's a 100% chance, right? This is a great example of black and white or all or none thinking, right? Saying, well, if it's not 0, it must be 100, right? But that's not the case, right? 0.00000000001 is unlikely, but not impossible. Impossible means it never happens. It is never. It is impossible, not possible, right? Similarly, it is not impossible to win the lottery, but we don't think we're going to win. We don't really think we're going to win. We fantasize about winning. That sounds fun, but it's a non-zero chance of winning. And to that end, it's a non-zero chance of, it's a likelihood that you're going to lose, right? Statistically likely you're going to lose, but it's a non-zero chance. So it means you could, but we don't treat that as if it's definitely going to happen if you buy a ticket, right? Okay. No, I'm going through a lot of weird stuff. So one thing, let's see here. All right. So Annie, when you were talking about your fungus obsession, right? I wonder if there's a story there, or what that story might be about you, okay? Now, this is that core fear, and ultimately what this helps to do is it helps to, by identifying it or kind of working to, consider that, it helps to guide our exposures, because we're kind of exposing you to what is the thing that the fungus represents? What does it mean to you, for you, about you, et cetera? And that's usually the idea of what we're trying to expose you to, rather than exposing you to a fungus, right? You're afraid of being exposed to the fungus because you don't want to get it. And the fungus is, by definition, I would say inconvenient. I'd say it sucks, and whatever verbiage you might use out there. But it's what does it mean? Are you worried that others are going to judge you or think negatively of you? Are you fearing that, or you're going to feel dirty or kind of bad? Are you worried that you're going to catch it and now you're going to spread it to someone else, and then what they're going to think or what that represents or signifies, right? To this end, I wanted to try to find out where you live, and not necessarily because we can have a tremendous amount of prescriptive prescriptive information from it. But if you remember back to a couple episodes ago when I was talking to Dr. Pinciotti and John Hirschfield, we were talking about the National OCD Study and kind of what they discovered from different areas and what sort of subtypes of OCD pop up in those various areas, and kind of why that would be in relation to the values of those areas. So it was interesting, and I think it'd be interesting if you want to go back and watch that. I'd say watch that video on YouTube, because I show those maps where it shows the statistics in the areas that we're talking about, but go check it out, see if there is any relevance. Anyways, so another consideration for your core fear is is it just kind of annoying and painful? And, that's getting a fungus is annoying and painful. Getting sick is annoying and painful. And is that what it is for you? And what's so bad about having something being annoying and painful? We are going to get sick. We're going to get in traffic. We're going to get in arguments with our friends or our partners. Why is this one so much worse for you? Lastly, or is it just kind of gross? It might just be that it's gross and you're doing everything you can to avoid something gross. More things for you to consider, and if you're working with a therapist to help chat through some of those things and to help process it. So, all right, so let's kind of get into what I think we can do about this, or yeah, I guess what do we do about this, right? Because my contention is that the problem isn't the fungus, but the problem here, I think, would be the amount of time that you're spending thinking about or adjusting your life, or kind of crafting and creating your life around the idea of fungus, right? You're kind of like, what do you do about this? You keep getting it all the time. And to a certain degree, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but to a certain degree, I think the main problem is how much how much time you're thinking about it. But there are also some considerations here. And again, the goal would be to be reducing the amount of time you're ruminating, or the amount of avoidant or other compulsive behavior that you're doing. And again, by compulsive behavior, I'm going to define that as unnecessary behavior. Because when it comes to this, and we can extrapolate this to some of the other subtypes as well, is sometimes as we're living at risk of something, well, there are some things that we can do or should do or would be reasonable to do that the average person would do to help prevent or avoid or I don't know. You get the idea. Prevent or avoid. My brain is not braining right now. Have you ever had that? Anyways, I do. So to prevent or avoid those things from happening. Now, it got me thinking, because you kept saying like, hey, it keeps showing up. I keep getting it all the time. What the heck? So here's what I did. I went to the Google box and I Googled, hey, are some people more susceptible to toenail fungus? It's a reasonable question. It's kind of one that you're asking. And guess what it had to say? I'm going to kind of read it for you. It says, yes, some people are more susceptible to toenail fungus due to factors like old age, chronic conditions such as diabetes or poor circulation, a weakened immune system, and a history of athlete's foot. Other conditions can be prolonged exposure to damp environments, wearing tight shoes, or foot or nail injuries, right? So this is kind of the summary that Google gave me, and I'm just going to kind of stick with this for now, and this would be something to talk with your doctor about, right? So as it's kind of going through, right? So some of the conditions that could lead someone, and I don't know if this is you or not, but we're going to keep going. So older age. So that can be, issues with poor circulation, weaker immune system, right? Chronic diseases, as it says, people with diabetes, circulatory disorders, or vulnerable or weakened immune systems to help fight those things off. Previous athlete's foot was interesting, where it talked about like it can spread from the skin to the nails and probably back and forth. Nail injuries, right? If there's a crack in your nail, it might make it it might make it easier to that fungus to get in and then spread. Geographically, I think this is interesting, where it talks about moist or damp environments, right? So if you're spending a ton of time in swimming pools, gyms, locker rooms, or other high-risk environments, and I wonder if the South is one of those, it's, in more humid locations, that can be the case. I don't know where you live, so that might be a consideration. Tight-fitting shoes, that's going to kind of trap in moisture. If you just love wearing, I don't know, like thigh-high boots, you tie those things up and you just can't get any air out. I don't know. And it did put this out there, and I'm not making a suggestion or insinuation here, but it says poor hygiene can sometimes, now again, this is not offensive, and I know some people are thinking this is offensive. It's just, how are you washing? How are you washing in relation to the fungus? Now, I go through all of that, and I think it's important to acknowledge some of those things, because if you acknowledge that you are, for whatever stinking reason, more susceptible to getting a fungal issue, especially with your toenails or your fingernails or whatever, it's helpful to keep that in mind if and when you get it again. So it doesn't play into this narrative about you being weaker or more broken, or somehow the universe is out to get you, or that you are more, I don't know, like the universe is targeting you, and that, whatever it might be, right? It's that biologically, you might be. All right. I know I'm more biologically likely to get bronchitis and pneumonia. Just because the cilia in my sinuses and my lungs don't really work. So dirt and dust and nonsense gets in there. And while y'all normies out there, the cilia catches that, kicks it right out, and you get right back to health. I get it. And then mucus comes around it and tries to glob around it so I can hork it out. Now, it's gross. That's kind of the main issue. But then if there's too much, it can get infected, and I get bronchitis and pneumonia real quick. That's who I am. Now, a side note, which is also kind of fun, which is super helpful in junior high and high school, I can hork a loogie like you wouldn't believe. Y'all didn't need to know this about me, but I can like hork a loogie like 10 yards. Why? Because I've practiced. And being in marching band, being on the football field, I measured. So it's a skill. I don't really put it on my resume, but just know it, feel it, embrace that fact about me as we continue to talk. All right. So here's why I wanted to bring up the point about being more susceptible. If you notice this thing is happening, it's important to go talk to a doctor about what's happening in order to get from a doctor appropriate and proper techniques on how to deal with this thing that you are experiencing and that you may be more susceptible to. Right? If you just notice this thing about you and you talk to your doctor, you can ask them, and this is a one and done type of thing, I want to mention that, is that we've talked to doctors about this. We find out what they would recommend to help reduce this and then to help deal with this if and when it starts to show up more for you. My doctors gave me recommendations on what I can do to help prevent getting sick more often, and I practice those things, sometimes more than others, but I do those things. When my back went out, I've yammered and whined about this, quite frankly, a lot. And there are times in my life when I do the things I'm supposed to do and times in life when I don't. When I don't, lo and behold, my back goes out, right? And then when I take care of myself again, lo and behold, I feel better. It doesn't mean that I'm out of the woods permanently, but it helps to reduce the chances of something like that happening. All right. So this is all part of what it means to be you and to be in the skin that you're in. All right, let me get back to my little notes here. All right, so this is kind of similar to, let's expand this out, not just to Annie's question, but like, let's say someone notices that they just keep getting into car accidents. Now, if you keep getting into car accidents, boy, it may be possible that you might be a bad driver, in which case it might be helpful to go take an extra driver's test or to learn more about it, right? If you're worried about this and this is happening a lot, learn how to handle or be around snakes if that's what you're afraid of, right? It can be helpful to learn how to deal with a family member or how to help some family member if they were to have a heart attack, if they are more at risk of having a heart attack, right? How to learn to deal with a cut if the family members or you or yourself are more susceptible to getting cuts for whatever reason, right? Now, why I bring this up again is we can gather information about some of the things that we're afraid of, not to give us reassurance that those things will never happen, but sometimes in the information, it helps us to interact with the world and ourself in a different and sometimes helpful way, a more helpful way than the compulsions of avoidance or other magical things that we're doing to try to avoid them, right? So we're trying to live life and put ourselves at normal risk of everybody else while also doing things that the average person might do, which may include learning how to drive safer, learning how to take care of yourself a little bit better. So, all right, that's more than I needed to say about that. All right. So as we keep going. So something that we also need to do is to accept, I think I mentioned this already, accept that this is something that you may get, and especially if you're at higher risk than others, right? Some of this mindset is, I put this in quotes for myself, is like, all right, this may happen or it may not, right? When you wake up, if this thought shows up immediately, rather than engaging with it to try to fight it off or to try to control it or to make sure it's never going to happen, we just kind of go, all right, this may happen. It may not happen, but it may. And if it does, we deal with it, right? So this is kind of similar to the idea that if you were driving, you might get into a car accident, right? If you're in a relationship with other people, you might hurt their feelings in some sort of way. You're going to misspeak if you're speaking, right? We're going to say things we don't want to say, or it's going to come out wrong, or they're going to hear it wrong, and it's going to be uncomfortable and awkward for everybody involved, right? So, lastly, you're going to notice people who are attractive. If you have your eyes open and are walking around, you're going to notice that there are attractive people, right? So in other words, our fear may happen in part, but it doesn't mean that it's always going to happen, or the insinuation of what it means is going to happen, right? One thing that I'd love for you to do is, and this is part of, again, what we can do to help treat this, is notice your hypervigilance, right? Notice your hypervigilance about what you're doing and your controlling behavior, right? Acknowledge that there's the urge to avoid, to run away, to deal with it in some sort of way. And we can do this through non-engagement responses, right? We can go like, I really want to avoid. I really want to scan. I really want to maybe to wash my hands 100 times, right? I really want to do that, but I'm going to choose not to, right? We can acknowledge that, boy, it would suck to get it again. Yeah, it really would, right? It would be awful if I were to get it. It'd be annoying, it'd be frustrating, it'd be painful, it'd be whatever, because it would be. But it doesn't mean that you are in that moment going to get it, or that you're guaranteed to get it in that interaction. It just means that you might. But again, I might get into a car accident today. I might get pneumonia today. I know I'm going to get pneumonia again. I don't know when, but you know what? I'll deal with it when I get there, right? And that brings me to that last point, is like, I'll deal with it when it happens, but it ain't happening right now. So what I'd encourage you to do is to spend as little time thinking about it, planning about it. One thing I was wondering about, what's your, are you engaging in negative self-talk about yourself in this? Right? Are you extending compassion to yourself for maybe some of the at-risk realities of your health? Maybe the surroundings, right? If you also notice that your friends are getting it all the time and you're hanging out with your friends, well, just in that circle, it might spread around more and more. That may just be the reality. If you're in a geographical area where there's, more fungus than other places, that may happen more often than others. But are you beating yourself up, or indulging in catastrophic thinking, or negative labeling, or that emotional reasoning, right? I feel really scared about this, so therefore I'm more likely to get it. Right? We want to be catching ourselves with that and challenging some of those negative thoughts and offering some more grounded, more realistic ways to think about it, rather than heaping shame and guilt on ourselves. So lastly, and perhaps I should have mentioned this earlier, is really be aware of what your compulsive behaviors are. We want to be first reducing the compulsive behaviors before we engage in exposure and response prevention. We're just doing the response prevention piece, right? Now, you said you know how to do ERP, which is awesome, but I think life is giving you the E part. We need to be practicing the RP part. So, I don't know what you're doing, but and some of this is going to be based on what you're willing to do, right? So there's always that spectrum of what we're willing to do, what may be helpful for OCD and anxiety, versus what we're willing to do in practice, right? Some people, some people are going to choose to wear gloves like for the rest of their life, right? And not touch anybody. And they might say, I am fine with this. To whatever degree they might be. You might be fine with that sort of life, the glove wearing life. And if you are, I'm not going to force you to change. But if it's one of those things where you go, I don't want to do this, but I feel like I have to do this, that's that kind of good place where we can maybe do some behavioral experiments, or maybe try and step outside of your comfort zone and see if your fear actually happens, or again, if nothing happens, right? Or if nothing happens immediately, right? So I want you to be aware of what your compulsions are, what your safety behaviors are that are above and beyond what the average person is doing to avoid those outcomes, to avoid getting that fungus, but within the bounds of what your doctor says that you ought to do in relation to your vulnerability to getting it. Because again, if you are more vulnerable, therefore there may be more things that you should do or should consider, right? So this isn't a one size fits all, and it's going to take some planning and ultimately trial and error. And in the trial and error, you may catch it. And when you do, we're not going to beat yourself up. You're not going to shame yourself. You go, yep, it happened because I get it sometimes. Well, moving forward, I'm going to try to do this, or I'm going to tweak this thing, and I'm going to see where it goes. But I'm not going to go all the way back to cloistering myself and staying away from everybody. All right. So some other possible, compulsions that somebody may do in this circumstance. You may resist kind of touching kind of common surfaces, right? Avoiding using doorknobs, shaking other people's hands. What I want you to do is also, I don't know if you're doing this, but if you're doing this, resist Googling, right? Just Googling treatment options, info on fungus, how it works, what it looks like, so you're not constantly checking online, right? You've gotten the information, I'm willing to bet. You messaged me this 3 years ago. 2 years ago? 2 years ago. Either way, it's been a while. All right. Also, this can also happen. Resist checking other people's hands and resist checking your hands, right? But I also would love for you to commit to a steady frequency to evaluate whether or not you are getting it or not. Right? So it doesn't mean, and you can, if you want to, you can reflect, or you can go back to my interview with Josh Spatelnik, where he was talking about health anxiety, where we talk about, it's not like, someone who has health anxiety means that they never go to the doctor. It means that they still go to the doctor when they need to and when something is wrong. But between the moment that they have the urge to check and when they actually go to the doctor, that's where they practice response prevention. That's where they practice reasonable and safe responses to their thoughts and feelings, etc. Right? So committing to a steady frequency, that may be like, all right, if you check your hands and feet once a week and see if there's fungus, and if there is, well, you go back and do treatment. Or if there's no fungus, well, I'll see you again next week, feet. But if that's what it means to live your life and to have that freedom, it's still checking, but it's going to be far less frequent, and it's going to have come with it a lot more freedom of mind and of time, right? So similarly, we need to catch your thoughts on this process. So resist mentally tracking kind of what you touched or what other people touched, right? This is that wet paint effect that we've talked about before, where it's like, you think about like if you touch paint, it gets on your hand, and then like everything that you kind of touch afterwards kind of has a little bit of paint on it. But when it comes to OCD and anxiety, there's like perception that like every time you touch it, 100% of paint and filth or garbage or whatever gets on that thing, and then 100% gets on the next thing. And if that person over there touched that bench, and if you touch it, you take on 100% of whatever the gross thing was. It's ultimately not how it works, but that's how anxiety makes you think it works. So resist that active process of checking and evaluating and plotting, because it's exhausting, and it's ultimately never going to get you what you ultimately want, and it's never going to reduce risk to zero, right? I encourage you to resist fantasizing about a life where you don't get it. That's not the life that you're in, and that's a fantasy, right? It's a little f fantasy. It's not reality is what it is. You may be someone who is more susceptible, and if you are, that is your reality. So fantasizing about something, the further you fantasize away from your reality, the more pain that sets in when you come back to your life and realize that it's not what your fantasy was. So the more that we can bring ourselves back and accept the reality that we're in and say, this is it. Now, how do I have the best possible life within the reality that I'm in, right? With my lungs and my sinuses, I'm having the best possible life that I can with the lungs and the sinuses that I have, right? Which means I cough all the time. I sound like that all the time, 24/7, all the time. I don't smell very well. People say I'm smelly, but I don't like smell things very well. And that's probably limiting my enjoyment of food. But you know what? I just don't know what life is like otherwise. And that's what my life is at my baseline. If I get frustrated or angry that I am not living what I could be or should be or what other people are, I would live in a life of torment, and that would be awful. But instead, this is my life, and this is my lungs, and these are my sinuses, and that's okay. And I'm going to act as if that's okay, and I'm going to live the best life I can. So lastly, we need to resist confirming that a surface has fungus without evidence. Sometimes we get into this mindset of, we go, yeah, that thing is dangerous, right? And we base that on thoughts, intrusive thoughts, mental images, just that feeling that comes up, and we go, yeah, that thing's dangerous. Though we haven't seen it, Though we didn't see someone with just like fungus infested paws and just like putting their hands all over everything. Like they rub their feet all over that doorknob. And you're going like, yeah, that thing's filthy. If you see someone do that, don't touch it. And I think that's fair. I think that's everybody would do that, right? If I see someone like hork on a doorknob, I'm not touching that doorknob. But without evidence of that, or seeing just a giant ball of phlegm just like coming down, dripping down, all gloopy like, I'm not going to assume that there is something wildly, vastly, terribly, awfully dangerous for me on it. I'm going to get on with my life. And that's living at risk, but that's the same risk of everybody else. And it's going to free me up to go live my life, because not everybody is constantly getting sick. Not everybody is constantly getting this fungus. Sometimes they do. And sometimes I will get pneumonia and bronchitis. So we get the idea. So Annie, I hope some of this, hope any of this was helpful. And to all you listeners out there, I hope this was somewhat helpful for you in thinking about, like, what do you do when, things do happen? And the reality that when we live a life at risk, which is the same life that everybody else seems to be having, sometimes unwanted things will happen, but they're not happening all the time, because the vast majority of times things aren't happening, at least the fears that we talk about, right? So I hope this was helpful. And until next time, everybody, take a risk and challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com, or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.